Sorry, guys, I just forgot to hit that earlier. No, Lisa, I think that's great. Thank you for that update. I forgot that we were going to keep those lights up until daylight savings time. That's wonderful. So, yeah, thank you for the update.
Well, my pleasure, and I'll be hanging out here with you all. So taking notes.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
So I think we have, I think everyone's really excited. I know I am to hear from Amy, Kara, and Jenny here tonight for Denver Cherry Creek West. And we are going to, I'm sure, turn this over. Tell me who you'd like me to have make a co-host, Amy. Who's going to drive?
I will go ahead and drive.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it, and Happy New Year. Like you said, it's hard to know how long to say that, but since we haven't seen any of you, with a few exceptions, yet this year, Happy New Year. Really excited to share with you where we are, and if it looks like I can share my screen, I will go ahead and do that. I assume you can all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, great. Wonderful. So this slide is one that you guys are all very familiar with. You know, we'll be speaking through some of our updates. Certainly we have some updated rendering to do, and I'll talk through a little bit about what the changes are that are coming from here. So certainly feel free to ask questions as you go, but what I'll do is sort of start with a little bit on what we've been doing for the last year. And then near the end, I'll talk about what is up to come. So first and foremost, our progress over the course of the last year. I know you're not used to seeing a lot of narrative from me, but it feels like it might be important. It feels like these are the kinds of things that you guys will want to understand. So first and foremost, the large development review is the city's process. Laura Aldretti, the head of planning, has called it the process to determine your process. But really, the idea is that you get all of the different departments that you have to interface with as a developer together, so that they can all identify what their big issues are, and then you can hopefully go into the next stage of the process a little easier. So that did take us 12 months. It results in a framework that then drives what we do as we move into rezoning and infrastructure planning. The key requests from the city staff were that they were looking for more of a street grid, and I'll show you what that means. It is not the same street grid as Cherry Creek North Drive or North by any stretch, but it is a diversion from what our plan has today. I can't recall if I have come back and shared with you one of the previous sets of feedback, which was we had one building that was really not moving all the way to First Avenue. In order to meet the CMX 12 guidelines, they really want all of our buildings to really carry a street edge on First Avenue. They wanted to better understand what our loading and vehicle access plan is, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that when we share these next slides. They had some different thoughts about what it means to embrace the creek. We agree on the goal, but we don't agree on the approach. So I'll talk about that a bit. Really very interested in welcoming and inclusive. For any of you who know much about Blueprint Denver and all of the things that the city's been looking for, welcoming and inclusive and equity are big words at the city, certainly. And so just making sure that the subtle cues that you make in urban design really make sure that we create a welcoming and inclusive place, which is certainly our goal as well. Being thoughtful about where pedestrian crossings will be. I think, as you know, that's something we care a lot about, but they've had some additional feedback on that. And then, of course, we talked about affordable housing and how we will start to integrate that into our planning as we move forward. So those were really the big areas that we talked about. And now that we've cleared that large development review, we will move into rezoning and infrastructure master planning. I'll talk about what that looks like after I go over how our plans have evolved. So first and foremost, our circulation patterns will change a bit, but our open space is preserved and our pedestrian focus is preserved. So this really just shows, high level, you can see that, the buildings are generally in the same location, but what they have done is be reallocated along sort of a north-south visual access as well as a pedestrian connection. That center line is really a pedestrian connector there. And then we're going to have more of a connection across the center of the site, which I'll walk through a little bit. But the moves around the edges still happen. All of the green space still happens. And then from our perspective, I think the primary pedestrian connection remains First and Clayton. I think that's really going to be where, sort of regardless of what happens to the Whole Foods site, that's going to be the main place that pedestrians are really going to want to cross, both to the north and to the south there, and then down across the site. So that's that sort of first piece. However, we now have some streets which are still private, and we have the ability to keep open or closed depending on what we're doing, that are going to be moving through the site in certain locations. So the blue lines are going to be where cars can go when the streets are fully open. This is a response to a few of the comments. It creates the opportunity for a little bit of circulation through. I'll give you some examples and some precedent images of what we're imagining here. But in this example, what you might recall is what we had before were these sort of entrances that were at the edges of each of these four key points. Those entrances will still remain as they are and still remain right in, right out on University Boulevard, which is really important for mobility and traffic and so on. And the same thing will be true on First Avenue and on Clayton Lane. And but we'll have the ability to close those. There will not be parking on the surface. And this really speaks again to the fact that it's been very important to us that we don't create a situation where people are circling on and off our site. Instead, they enter the single reservoir of shared parking, which we still intend to have here. And there will still be 4 entrances to the garage. One of those will be up by First Avenue, and it will go into Building E, much as it did before. The other one will come in off of Clayton and go into Building C, and we'll have another one on Building E, and then we'll have a 4th one down on Cherry Creek North Drive as we did before. But either way, most of the parkers will be entering and getting below grade right away. So talking about that a little bit and the impacts on what that means for our plan. First in Clayton and that entry plaza really stays very much the same. I think the one difference, and this is, I'm going to go back a slide just for a second. The only real change to that First and Clayton connection is that we now also have a 2-way cycle connection. So that you can see a green line along Clayton Lane. We'll have a northbound and a southbound bicycle lane, so that if you have been cycling on Cherry Creek North Drive, or if you want to, you can connect right there and cross at First and Clayton. So I think that'll be a nice experience. We're going to take all of that onto our site because obviously nothing's happening today with the shopping center. It's one of the big sales tax drivers for the city and one of their most successful shopping centers, as I'm sure Jeremy would say if he was on the call today. So otherwise, though, everything that we're planning on doing here at the First and Clayton entrance remains as it was. This particular rendering is going to change a little bit, although what I will say is, as you can see the pedestrians crossing freely at grade across from the north, we're looking towards the south, we still intend that pedestrian connection remain flat and at grade. So cars will recognize that pedestrians are prioritized through that space. So we'll be doing an update to this rendering, but that's really the difference between what you see here as far as how that will change. So diving into what these streets mean a little bit more specifically, when they are fully open, we will have these sort of drop-off courts at each of those locations, so that to the extent that an Uber arrives or someone, a delivery or something like that arrives, there will be drop-off courts at each of those entry points. And otherwise, if a truck wants to pass through for some reason, they will be able to pass through when things are fully open and cross across Market Square and the green, although there will be those grade differentials we were talking about. And you can see those, there are these sort of, they look like little black lines, but they're actually sort of designed to be bollards. That's where we would have the opportunity to close things off. And here's where that starts to look, what that starts to look like. So here is a partial closure. In this case, you would still be able to come in, say, on University Boulevard and exit, for example, on First Avenue, but we would close that portion of the street so that Market Square and the green remain fully pedestrian prioritized and cars are not trying to transit across that space. And then finally, our fully open, this is the version that looks it looks the most like what everybody has seen since the beginning, where we really can, in the event of a significant event like the farmers market, for example, or really a lot of the other events that could happen here in Cherry Creek West, we can really pull the traffic back and out away from the center of the site. So those are really the three conditions that we imagine this can be worked through. And how those streets will function in those components. So here are just some precedent images, since we don't have any new renderings yet and we're really still working through the design. There are a lot of different things to be considered here. Some of it can be making differences in paving, so you have visual cues. You can also have tactile cues, so that you can feel a difference between things. That helps really signal between a car and a pedestrian that you're having a place where there could be a conflict, and making sure that that is safe is important. Bollards are another way that that can be done, as is shown on the right. And then a couple more images that really show, the one on the left, really that sort of curbless condition throughout in that case. That's a European city, so we do have some slightly different regulations about how we'll be able to deal with that. But nonetheless, it's sort of the idea that really it feels very pedestrian welcoming. And then you can also see that an example on the right where we show that sort of bump where you come up at a place that is very clearly pedestrian prioritized. Rather than that just being a crossing in this location, though, it would be a broad area of the plaza area, because that really is designed for pedestrians first. And then here are just a couple more examples. These are from Copenhagen, but again, really just sort of showing how the pedestrian is still the priority here. So now coming back down towards the very south of the site, now we're going to talk about the impacts to Cherry Creek North and the changes that we have made. So this rendering where you're really standing is essentially on top of Cherry Creek North Drive. This is going to change going forward. And this has been a large part of the conversations that we've been having over the course of time with city staff about some of the complexities related to our plan. What they have ultimately worked with us on, and we are working to, really capitalize on opportunities around, is bringing Cherry Creek North Drive up to grade. And they've identified a variety of issues, which I can go into in pieces or no, but for reasons that relate to the creek itself and connections there, that they would like to see Cherry Creek North Drive remain at grade. And we can see some benefits to that too, despite the fact that we had really come out strong with this idea that Cherry Creek North Drive should be buried. Ultimately, what that does mean is that pedestrians could, in theory, feel more connection at the places where there was grade separation at either side. They will have that direct at grade connection really all the way across the site. And that's was sort of the city's comment about their feeling about what it means to embrace the creek, was having that really be fully accessible there. What is important to us regardless is that we have a really nice wide pedestrian prioritized connection that becomes the way that pedestrians move both northbound from the creek into our site and through to Cherry Creek North, as well as southbound. And there again, we really want to do that chairing up. So that crossing is 100% flat and at grade, and you still really experience that connection across. What you'll see here in the center there is the connection to that fourth access point into the garage. At this point, we're designing that really as its own separate little pavilion. And we think the important piece about that is that if you arrive by car, and this is going to be based on our initial traffic studies, one of the major ways that people access Cherry Creek West, if you arrive by car and you don't live here or work here, but you're visiting, you need a very obvious cue that this is public parking. And so we really want that to be an element that feels welcoming and inviting and feels like it belongs to the public. So we're really showing that as a special element here in this location. But I think the key, and we're just really starting on our redesign of Cherry Creek North Drive, is, as you're probably all aware, right now Cherry Creek North Drive is just nothing but pavement and parking control. And so we want to add islands that are planted, add trees, and really make the experience as soon as you turn onto Cherry Creek North Drive feel welcoming, feel like you've arrived someplace very special. So we're continuing to work through that. And we are really just now starting to have conversations with the city about this alternative and what this means from the standpoint of meeting their goals. And then we'll have to work separately with parks about what does it mean to improve the creek, what are their goals, and planning has asked them to really put together what their objectives are for that, so that we can make sure that everything is integrated and we're working together on that. So here's another view of that a little bit up close. It doesn't show the little sort of pavilion lid that we imagine over the parking, but it gives you a sense of how that crossing might feel from a pedestrian perspective. What this one doesn't show is sort of an alternate paving that really shows that as pedestrian prioritized, which we imagine we would have. So that would be one certainly alteration that we would make to this. This drawing shows that component a little bit better, but shows another possibility where we actually pull that access point for pedestrians over to the east a little bit, therefore allowing it to have some separation from that public parking access. That could really have some benefits from the standpoint of safety and clarity and so on, and really then centers that pedestrian connection right on the green space too. It would then potentially have a little additional outdoor space that would be separate and off to the side from that, which could be a unique piece. But again, just really starting to study that. So here are some precedents on the left. That top image really kind of speaks to what the connection would be when you really have two street edges. So maybe right at University or right at Clayton. But with really improved pedestrian experience and some green space, but then along Cherry Creek North Drive, along our frontage there, making sure that the buildings really meet the street. It's really active, energetic, nice paving, and a really special place from really the moment you cross off of University onto Cherry Creek North Drive. And then to that point about the sort of rollover and the pedestrian, that large image on the right really shows that pedestrians would cross at grade, whether they're on foot or rolling, they are crossing right at grade, and cars have to go up and over, signaling. Certainly they will have stop signs too, but it's an additional cue not to gun it off the start, and to remember there could be pedestrians there. And then I wanted to sort of finish with, we have not changed our building heights. So our buildings remain at the same heights we've been proposing. We're really continuing to have the conversation with a baseline zoning goal of CMX 12, which is consistent with the planning and blueprint and the planning in the Cherry Creek area plan around this site. We actually just had sort of a rezoning kickoff call with staff today, and they concurred with that generally. There's details to be worked out because we really only have two public streets, University and First Avenue, and everything else around us is private. So, the devil will be in the details there, but general support for that. And then, so now stepping into next steps. We've filed a pre-application, which is basically the thing that starts the conversation with the city around rezoning. We have not filed our formal rezoning application because we do want to work through some of these sort of questions about how we deal with the nuance of us being in a, only having 2 public streets adjacent to us. So those conversations will continue this month and into February before we file. One complexity is that we are part of the zoning for the shopping center right now. So the whole site from Steele all the way to University is one B3 zone lot, and we need to separate out. Taubman has submitted a big document to the city to show that their site can stand alone without our site. And once that all goes through, then we can separate, and that will be key to us finalizing our rezoning. And then on infrastructure master planning, that will run in parallel with the rezoning process. We'll plan to give a sort of draft initial filing to the city in mid-February that really helps them address some of the questions candidly that will help them understand how we intend to meet the rezoning needs, even though we only have 2 fronting streets. That gets a little bit in the weeds, but that's, that's the document that talks about street alignments, utilities, street sections. What do those feel like? How do we manage some of those questions around pedestrian and vehicular clarity and so on and so forth. And then in connection with that, we will do a mobility study to understand, further understand what Fair and Piers, we also love Fair and Piers, it has already sort of analyzed as far as where traffic is going to move as it relates to the shopping center, but also our site. So that will be part of that process as well. And then of course, some continued community engagement. There's of course city required community engagement. I think we've really tried to do above and beyond on that. We know the neighbors around here care a lot about what's happening on this site. So this is one of many of those conversations that we'll be having over the coming months. So that is my presentation. So I will take any questions. I can scroll back to perhaps one of the maps. If anybody would like to ask any questions,
let me just look at the chat here and see.
Yeah.
Let's see. Meredith, I'm going to have you just, it says for Dottie and Cherry Creek West, the University at Cherry Creek South Drive stacked dozens of cars deep well north of Cherry Creek for the turns. Is it illegal to change lanes mid intersection, but this intersection requires it? I'm not sure exactly how to unpack all that. If Meredith, if you want to answer or ask that directly.
Well, I don't know if Dottie's on the call, and I know that it's been brought up several times, but right now there is limited separation between Cherry Creek North Drive and Cherry Creek South Drive. And I just drove it, and it's an illegal activity, and I think that Doty needs to address it. I don't know, unless they move Cherry Creek North Drive and move that further north, it's just an awful situation right now. And when I was driving through, there was no one making the turn at Cherry Creek North Drive. So you had over a dozen cars just kind of stacked up, and a potential accident. I don't know how to further explain it. I don't think that it's Cherry Creek West, East-West Partners' responsibility to fix, but I think that Doty has to address it. And they said that they were going to, I thought, address it during this whole redesign. And I don't see.
Okay, that fair enough, Meredith. Let me run with that just a little bit, because we're also in the throes of Denver moves, and Stuart's going to say a few words about that. And there were a couple of other questions about Cherry Creek North Drive, whether it could be eliminated or put underground. It sounds like those that didn't fly with the city, or and so
I can speak to that.
Yeah, I'm just not going to go there, because I think that ship has sailed. So, but if the city wouldn't let you underground it and make that connection to the creek like you wanted, I guess we'll watch about how this project can really open to the creek if that doesn't happen. And I understand you're starting to work on those designs. I guess, you know, the whole issue about how traffic moves, and you said you traffic study, which I wonder if we could take a look at that and maybe we could find out how to get access to some of these documents. If you, I know you haven't done your formal rezoning filing, but the pre-app, is that something that we can talk about? There are a couple of things that we've always had and it's in the Cherry Creek area plan. You know, the corners of University and First are supposed to have a gateway for the entire area, the Cherry Creek Gateway, also at Colorado Boulevard and First. Is there room, is the pork chop still gonna stay there, or are you changing? Is that changing? And I would think that as part of the traffic study, those issues about stacking and turning at what times a day, and some of that depends on the uses that you're going to put on this, have got to be a part of the discussion. And so maybe you can say a little bit about where you are in the traffic study and how that relates to some of these questions about, are you having specific turn lanes that go into the property? I assume so, because they can't just be on First, because that's where the bus is going to be. I mean, say a little more about that.
Yeah. So that's exactly what the infrastructure master planning process that we're about to dive into is going to deal with. We are just kicking off the mobility study. We had done some initial traffic analysis that I think I spoke about, way back, that essentially came to this idea that the best thing that we can do for traffic in this area is get people off of the main arterials as fast as possible and underground. And the majority of people, I think it's something like 40% of them we're expecting, will probably want to access, related to Cherry Creek North Drive. That doesn't change with this being at grade versus below grade as far as what traffic wants to do, but certainly a more full-fledged mobility study needs to happen. And that, I think if we're in anything yet, it's the fact-finding stage. I think we've had a conversation with the city about, sort of when the data should be from. You could argue it should be pre-pandemic as opposed to now, or vice versa. So I think we're just really kind of kicking that part off. So we are quite some time before we're going to have a full mobility study ready. But yes, we have to look at stacking depths. We have to look at how things relate to bus facilities, whether they stay exactly where they are or they don't. But either way, there are certainly existing bus traffic along University, as well as First Avenue, and a future BRT potentially planned in Denver Moves Cherry Creek. So all of those things, as well as cycling and pedestrian movements, all need to be considered as part of that. So as far as how that traffic is handled, I think first you find out how much you have, and then you figure out, you work with Dottie to, identify what the solutions are for that. So I can't say yet what that means as far as stacking lengths and how people come into these. I think the fact that it's not a stoplight at University or at First where our connections are, at least means you don't have some of those complexities adding into things, at least as our early conversations with Dottie have suggested. Did that answer all your questions, or is there one piece left?
Well, I'm sure there are many pieces open. I just wanted to sort of, wanted a placeholder on the fact that there are all these issues in that bucket, and that bucket is just being looked at. But Stuart, I'd like you to weigh in. I see you have your hand up.
Sure. I heard the car mentioned, 50 times, the bike mentioned twice, and the bus mentioned once. There are infrastructure elements that need to be supportive of alternative modes. One thing we have learned from Denver Moves Cherry Creek and looking at the data is you're going to have to reduce a lot of trips. You're going to have people riding that bus, or this area is going to get way too congested. The intersection already is a problem. And I assume that when you have these shared roads that cross into the property, that those are bike routes as well?
Potentially. So that's, I mean, the primary bike connections are really designed to be at Clayton, University where they stand today, and Cherry Creek North Drive as the city's imagining it. We also intend to have a great deal of bike parking downstairs. I think the main reason I'm using the word car so much is because that has really been the focus on, the city hasn't been worried about our pedestrian connections at all. They think they're great. They haven't been worried about the bike connections at all. They think they're great. What they've been worried about is they didn't like the way we were had cars interacting with the four corners, not really corners, but the four edges of the space. And so that's really why the focus has been on that. That's certainly not ours. As you'll recall, we had sort of said the pedestrian is prioritized and cars are absent. That just isn't the reality of, I think, the city's larger planning process. We are 100% with you on broader mobility. And I would also say that I think one of the real opportunities of Cherry Creek West is adding enough additional workspace and living space that people who live here can work here, and people who work here can live here. And combined with the affordable housing that we'll be creating, which could potentially mean that some of the people who commute here today could actually live here. I think there's some real opportunities for there to be impacts even on the trips that exist today. So
Sure.
that would be, that's my thought on it. But yes, we're fully aligned. If we can get people to use something other than their car to get here, or to just leave it behind entirely, that is the goal.
And just the one point I'm trying to emphasize is, it's one thing to put bikes underground. It's another for bikes to be able to pull up to the restaurant they're going to be eating at and park their bike in an area that doesn't just detract from the beauty of the area, but they feel like they have immediate access. And, I know that you'll be looking at this in the mobility plan, but the magnitude of moving people out of cars is pretty high. And that's going to require making cyclists feel like they're a priority. Making pedestrians, you certainly have done that here. We're going to have to make transit a priority. And, at some point, I really do think we should talk about a mobility hub, whether it's underground or above ground, but we need to be able to have a convenient way for transit to access this property, whether that's the micro transit shuttle idea or even a reroute of the bus, whatever it's going to take. To make that the priority. I'm disappointed with some of the city's decisions, the street grid, not burying Cherry Creek North Drive, but those are done deals. So I won't go any further. But thank you for your presentation.
Sure. And Stuart, really great comments there on having some above grade bike parking. I think that's important. I think what we're more concerned about sort of saying yes to right away is that you could actually continue to ride your bike through. What we don't want is yet another conflict of high speed, low speed, medium speed traffic. And so it may be that there's a point where, maybe when you hit those bollards where it's pedestrian prioritized, where you're asked to get off your bike, but you could still park it. I think that would be great, and really speaks to the idea that you want bikes here. We just know that most people prefer to park their bikes in a secured location, and that racks tend to make people more nervous. So definitely a continued conversation we should have for sure.
Yes.
And I will
Yeah,
say that
thank you.
in Cherry Creek North, the stats that they utilized that we were complaining about a little bit in our last meeting was that, from 2019, and I understand that that's pre-pandemic analysis, but it's also electric bike, scooter, and these modes of transportation that you can barely use the bike path if you're trying to walk. So there's some other issues, I think broader issues about how we really move bikes and these and they're motorized vehicles basically. And so, but I think that is for a deeper dive at this point. And I know that there probably are a lot of questions. Brooks isn't giving up on trying to get rid of Cherry Creek North Drive. But,
So
but I think
I
that
can
Brooks, that's
I
why
can
I'm
at
saying
least
the
share
ship has
that one.
sailed.
I can at
It's-
least just quickly answer it for anyone who hadn't heard it. Cherry Creek North Drive is private. It's actually part of the land that the Buell Foundation owns, and it is a condition of our development that we not dedicate any land, and also that we don't give up any access to the shopping center. So that would be. That would be a fatal flaw from the Buell Foundation's perspective, and the Tubman's perspective. Parks and Rec actually asked the same question, because of course they would just love if that was just gone. But
Well, we don't have a lot of time left because we've got a lot on the
Yeah.
agenda, but Meredith,
Oh,
did you
yeah.
have
No, for
a
sure.
real quick, can you make your question real quick, Meredith?
Just a real quick comment talking about why I'm so concerned about the car stacking is that there are several thousand units that are on Cherry Creek South Drive. So it's in addition, I mean, these are residential units that only have access, that have very limited access because the grid doesn't go through. So that's why I'm talking about cars. I totally want your bicycles and I appreciate everything that you guys have done.
I have one
Thanks.
other question. If you could go back to the heights
Yep.
and just touch on, so you're looking at initially a CMX.
Yeah, CMX 12 is the base zoning. So
Okay.
the question is around why there's a 13s on here, I'm
Mhm.
guessing.
Yes.
And sorry, I can't look at the chat and present at the same
Yeah,
time.
no,
So
that's just my question.
yeah, no. So where that comes from is in the way that expanding housing affordability ordinance works. When you do high impact compliance, because this is a high impact area and so on, when you do high impact compliance, you would typically get the right to go higher when you do more affordability or deeper affordability. That would be up to 16 stories. But as I think you guys are all aware, there is a Cranmer view plane here. So we are limited to more like 14 stories. What we're proposing is, rather than spread our 12 stories evenly throughout the site, that we have varying heights, so we have varying views and we can respect some different kinds of perspectives through here. But what that does mean is that a couple of those residential buildings, and those are the two that show those 13s, would be able to take advantage of that height incentive in that location. So that's how that piece works.
Okay, and then, so does that mean you are or are not going to be using the affordability, big cap A affordable housing legislation for increased height?
We are, but not up to the maximum at
Okay.
all. Partially because of the Cranmer View corridor. And I know it's that view corridors have been broken before. We have no desire to do that. I don't think it's appropriate here. I think that the planning in the Cherry Creek area plan was clear in what's desired here. So we're just looking to take a little bit of it, but not all of it.
And with that, there will become you'll have a development agreement with either the city and maybe some of us weighing in on the extent of the affordability in the project or in those buildings specifically.
Yeah, so what we're talking with HOST, the Housing Opportunity and Stability Department, about is 15% at 60% AMI. And we like that level because we think that really supports people who are working in Cherry Creek North and in the shopping center, and therefore could potentially allow people to live and work here, truly live and work here, and really improve that experience here. So,
and I know, again, it's my own thing because I like to try to stay on time, but two other quick questions. So these areas where people can pull in, so the Uber Lyft areas, but so if there are eventually micro transit units like you have in Montbello and some of those, are those large enough to accommodate a small, the buses, the micro transit type vehicles that we're hoping at some point that would be available within the neighborhood and within the area, and maybe even from downtown to Cherry Creek?
I don't know. That's a good question. And also whether that's the right place to do it. As I think you guys know, and they're not depicted on this, I apologize, but we had this idea that there were all these pedestrian pop-up locations and that they would make these really obvious places in the parking. I think there's certainly some possibility that that could move to below grade, which could be nice for inclement weather and things like that too, or a day that it's 98 degrees, for example. So I don't know, but that's a great question.
Okay, well, it is almost 6 o'clock and we've got 2 other things to catch up on. And this is a really good update. I really appreciate it. Amy, I know you'll be back. We'll be talking, I think, more now that we're moving into this rezoning process, because obviously you'll need a lot of the input from those people who are on this call and the neighborhoods represented thereby. So
Absolutely.
So thank you very, very much. And you're welcome to stay for the updates. I think I'm going to turn it right over to Stuart for an update on Denver Moves, because it's very consistent in what we're talking about when we're talking about all the transit issues with Denver West.
Great. Should I start, Lou?
Yes, please.
Okay. First, I wanted to explain that Lou, Richard, and I met with the project team prior to the holidays and discussed with them our concern that, one, we don't have enough data, and two, that some of these things are being rushed and that we need more time to really think these through and talk these things through. So while you may have noticed that the timeline was extended, it has, and there are going to be more stakeholder meetings. Essentially, the stakeholder meeting we had before the holidays was to talk about existing conditions, but honestly, they lacked 2/3 of the information that we needed. So this last stakeholder meeting that we just had really presented a whole lot more data. It's hard to digest because it is so much, but it is directly responsive to what we asked for. It will help guide us in making better decisions. As Lou mentioned, the one concern that I've had, and Lou as well, is that the travel patterns that they're using, the origin destination information is 2019. And we know that there have been a lot of changes in how people commute, where they commute to and from. So we're going to try to augment that information so that we can get that done. We also provided some input on a microtransit service. We haven't gotten to the point of recommendations, but Richard and I took advantage of meeting with a vendor just to understand how microtransit might operate in Cherry Creek. We didn't do this on behalf of the team. We did it so that we would have our own understanding of what's out there. So we have an important meeting coming up. It is the virtual open house, and that's going to be on Tuesday, February 7th. We will send the notice to all of you. It will be from 5:30 to 7 o'clock at night. What will be presented are the two things the stakeholder committee has looked at, which is the public input that we've received thus far through surveys, intercept surveys, interviews, employer data, and other things. And then second, it will present the information gathered about the existing conditions. And when I say existing conditions, there's also a little bit of a projection in there to the extent that we ask them to put all currently planned development on the same page and pretend like it's all built and tell us what happens. The status quo, it goes really high to the point where we will have delay at intersections, which would be challenging. So our task ahead is really to figure out how to get workers especially out of their cars and at the same time improve our labor pool for Cherry Creek. As you know, if you run a business in Cherry Creek, it is hard to recruit and retain employees who are dependent on the bus. We just don't have that service. So these are things that will be looked at, but please spread the word as many people that we can get to this meeting, the better. So I encourage you to look at that. We'll send out that information. If you don't mind, Lou, I'm going to just provide another interesting update.
Please.
Last year, we worked really hard to get tax credit legislation put in place, and Senator Hansen helped us. And we were able to get a new law passed in Colorado that started on January 1st, which allows employers to deduct up to 50% of the funds that they spend on their employees' commute. So if they buy transit passes for the employees, they'll get half of that back. Even if they're a nonprofit and aren't paying taxes, they will get a financial credit that will come back to them. This, we hope to be a strong motivator for employers to offer eco-passes. I've shared with you before that that many years ago, you got JW Marriott to buy into the eco-pass, and they got their employees up to, well, initially it was 94% using things other than the private car. But they made it a real big priority at Clayton Lane. We had a great program in place that went away. We had that bike storage facility there that got 151 employees of mostly Henderson to bike at least occasionally. And when we took that storage valet parking away, it went from about 151 who would bike occasionally down to about 10. So you can see accommodating these alternative modes and making it attractive can make a very big difference. But please spread the word on this tax credit. If anybody wants to know more about it, you can send them my way. I'd be happy to answer that. And then lastly, we finally picked a date for our event, which is the Road Ahead, which is going to be in April. It will be, where did I write that date down? I'll send it out to you. It's a Wednesday, April 17th or something like that. But our topic this year is going to be transit-oriented development and TDM. We're going to have a speaker who has worked on Tyson's Corner. If you know, Tyson's Corner in the DC area was a big shopping center, and they essentially took the big parking lot and put in a bunch of buildings around the shopping center, and they managed to get an extension on their rail services. But they've been through everything that we're talking about, and they've done creative things. So we're going to have a speaker tell us about what Tyson's Corner has done. So it's not that dissimilar to what we have, and we'll have other great speakers. But I took this opportunity to plug our upcoming event.
Okay, that's fine. I went last year. They're very interesting. And Stuart, if you just tell me the name of that bill, or if you know the statutory reference, I'll pull it and I'll send it to everybody so that they can see what that is, because that could be a real game changer. I mean, we
yes,
when I was with QTech Rock downtown, we gave all of our employees eco passes, and now again it's downtown, so you'd have people coming from all over the place, Longmont, Boulder, whatever, and they could eco pass into work. It made a huge difference, especially when, parking downtown when I was there was, $250 a month. So yeah, it makes a big difference. I also think, Amy, this is one of those things that we need to start thinking about requiring the developers and landlords. I know it's not a typical thing for a requirement, but since it's there, it's if you build it, they will come. It's, if you require it, they will do it. So, and we don't want to impede any leasing opportunities, but we think it's still something that that is an appropriate ask for so much density in an area that's already seeing massive developments. And we just have to do something about getting people out of cars. We just have to. And
you're right.
even if it's eco pass, We need to get the bus to be more frequent so people will take it. But we just don't have this capacity, and having served now for months with Stuart on Denver Moves Cherry Creek, it is clear that it's not like we're gonna completely overhaul the infrastructure system for cars, bikes, and buses anytime soon. So if these developments are coming out, actually, Amy, what I really want you to do is, since Whole Foods is on the market, I want you to buy that too. I want you guys to do that too. Then it would be nice and, coordinated.
That'd be great. I don't know that that's gonna, I don't know that they want to talk to us about that. I think they consider us a competitor.
I don't know. I heard it's on the block. So let me just check the chat. There were a couple of things here. Okay, we'll get all these questions are about. I'm going to get a bunch of information out to you all after the meeting. So we'll move on now because Bill has a presentation for us. So thank you very much, Stuart, and we will follow up and get this stuff emailed over to you in the next day or so. So everyone has this information about both this open house, where to find the updates for Denver West if you don't have it, and those kind of things. And to Stuart's point, he just put in, it is a virtual open house. So with that, Bill, I'm going to have you take us home with your presentation. I'm going to make you a co-host so that you can share your screen. Okay. And if you want to come off mute, Bill, and take us through this presentation, which is very, very interesting. I really appreciate you doing this, Bill, because I think this can have implications for other areas as far as design overlays and sort of something minimal, not a full rezoning, but impactful.
Well, and Amy set a very high standard, which I won't try to match her. It's a much simpler word-oriented presentation. We've been working for about 7 or 8 years on this Cherry Creek design overlay headlines and gone through all sorts of steps with the city. And Amy, I hope it goes a lot more easily for you as time passes than it did for us. But basically what it is that there are essentially 2 sections of Cherry Creek East. On the west side is more of a commercial section, and that's west of Madison. And on the east side is more residential. There are also some commercial strips along First Avenue and in the southeast corner of Cherry Creek East, where there's some commercial buildings. So the commercial overlay applies to those commercial areas, and the residential area applies to just a very small number of streets in the center of Cherry Creek East. And what I've done here is laid out what the objectives are, what we're trying to do here. Those are now consistent with Denver plans. Thanks a lot to work by CPD. And the wording here is actually CPD's wording. So I'm just going to really talk to it. You can read it for yourself. But the basic idea on the commercial portion of Cherry Creek East, which is again what between Madison and Steel Street, primarily, is to make it more pedestrian friendly, make sure it remains that way and becomes more so as time passes. And the primary tools for doing that are twofold. We'll talk about those in a second. On the residential side, it's really the same thing. Continue to keep our high walkability score in that area, and also do what we can to improve neighborhood safety. As some of you are aware, crime in Cherry Creek has been escalating recently. So how are these objectives obtained? It's really straightforward. On the west side in the commercial area of Cherry Creek, there are going to be requirements for setbacks from the street, and also setbacks within the buildings themselves to create the layer cake type design that you see in Cherry Creek North today. For buildings over 6 stories, or the developer has an option of offering public space. And neither the setbacks or the amount of public space is really intended to be burdensome. It's really, as somebody from city planning said, a rather light touch from a developer perspective. And finally, for parking, that's very simple. That's something that's very common. The parking would be covered, so the facade of the building where the parking is on the lower levels is, appears to be a single unit. Okay, but the other interesting thing about the parking, which is something that came up from our side, but of interest to the city, is that the height of parking spaces have to be at least 12 feet. And the objective there is that at some point, should the amount of car traffic decline, or the need for parking decline, that parking space can be turned into residential units, which is a huge objective as far as the city of Denver in terms of replacing parking with housing. On the residential side, one of the things that is really nice about the entire Cherry Creek area is most houses have porches already. Okay, so this would make that if the property is rezoned or redeveloped a certainty. Okay, and we have had actually a couple of properties built without porches along Harrison recently. So it would require one unenclosed porch per dwelling unit. The idea there is to increase neighborhood interaction and also to put more eyes on the street, which is a security thing. There would be a slight increase in the number of the percentage of open area on properties. It isn't going to take away from the size of the house, but it will change from about 50 to 60% the amount of open space that has to be landscaped. And that again is very consistent with the rest of Cherry Creek. On each lot zone, we'd have one deciduous canopy tree planted every 25 feet. And this has been worked out with the urban forester as the minimum that can be allowed to have a tree growing and have it stay healthy. That is obviously also considered in alignment with other city objectives to increase the urban forest and its associated health and heat island reduction benefits. And there's almost at this point something that really happens almost throughout Cherry Creek. There would be a requirement that there be one light fixture in the front of the property and one light fixture in the back. Originally, the design was the default would be those light fixtures would come on automatically at night, but that's something that the city cannot monitor. So it's just a requirement now that we have those light fixtures. That's really it. It's very, very light. It's really not a lot of change there. So far, we've taken this through city planning to have their approval and the LUDI review, and then it goes to city council on February 6th of this year. That's my presentation, really. Any questions or thoughts?
So I'll just chime in a little bit because I started my life in Cherry Creek and Cherry Creek East and served on that board and watched it develop. And boy, I think Brooks, it was 25 years ago, maybe more, 30 years ago, has to be 30 years ago, that we all worked on what were then design guidelines. And we used to have official design guidelines in Cherry Creek East that required that front porch and the lush landscaping, because everything was a PUD back then. So when they put in the new zoning, our design guidelines that we'd all worked so hard for went away. And that was the impetus for, I think, doing initially the residential overlay to kind of get some of that back. One of the other things that the design guidelines required was the pedestrian lighting that you see in Cherry Creek East, which is lovely because you have the trees and then you have the moderate scaled lights, pedestrian lights that are in the you know, in the public space, on the tree lawn. And it was lovely. And all those requirements went away when they did the new zoning and didn't keep those guidelines. So it sounds like that was probably something, Bill, on the pedestrian lights. Did you try to get that and they wouldn't give it to you?
Right, yeah, an overlay is stops at the envelope of the private property, of the private property building. So design guidelines are actually a much better thing. You know, hopefully communities will be able to work with those much more in the future under a new city government. But right now, there's a lot of opposition to doing anything in terms of guidelines or overlays in some aspects, in some areas of the city.
Yeah. So, but if anybody just goes through Cherry Creek East in the evenings, you'll see there still are many of those lovely pedestrian lights, including when we were working with the Daniels Foundation, when they built their building, we asked them to put them in and they put them in. So it is something that really helps the pedestrian nature. It's so dark in Cherry Creek North sometimes. So I'd love to see some of that come back, but kudos for you and your team getting that done. I know that it has been a long time coming, and you know, just congratulations for that. You know, a couple of the things that we've been doing on some of our projects that are not in the bid, you know, we're pretty comfortable at this point with the bid design guidelines. So we've asked some of those businesses developing outside of the bid to voluntarily agree to utilize the design guidelines. So there's a lot that you can do if you watch these things and work on it. And I just think Cherry Creek East deserves a lot of credit for getting this overlay done so that the rest of their neighborhood develops fairly consistently. So congratulations on that. And
Thank you. I think one thing that may come up in the future for neighborhoods in the District 5 area is the potential of a GID.
Yeah, we've talked about it. So that stands for General Improvement District. You know, I've said since the early 80s, Meredith and I were trying to get some money out of a bond deal, like 86 or 7 or whatever, for some improvements on Alameda and some stuff. And, you know, it was always a disappointment because we weren't in that queue. And even back then we said, well, we ought to have just the Cherry Creek area, Cherry Creek East and North, and, you know, go into a general improvement district so that we could actually raise some of this, you know, a little bit of money and put in some pedestrian lights and maintain them and those kinds of things. So it's been brought up before. I think it'll be brought up again as we continue to develop and people continue to have issues with what the city can and cannot do or will and will not do. If the city doesn't have the funds and this isn't where they're going to put the funds, then a general improvement district is always something that we can look at again. So you have to have a lot of resident buy-in and interest in doing that. And it takes a lot of work, but I think that Cherry Creek East has proved by getting this overlay done that if you work on it long and hard enough, it can happen. So we can see about that.
Also want to give a shout out to Chris Hines, who has been supporting us through this process.
Yeah, I know that I have no doubt that this will pass without any problems. Well, guys, we are coming up on the end of the meeting here. It's 6:20. I have a couple of other things, and then I know that I promised Susan that I would raise the issue of getting together in person, but let me just say a couple quick things. At our next meeting, we will have Denver Moves Cherry Creek presenting. So hopefully we'll have some more updates on that. I also wanted to let everybody know that Denver Digs Trees is doing its basically tree giveaway. They're like $35 for trees. And Cherry Creek North just launched its new website. So we have a good, robust new website, and it's just CCN for Cherry Creek North Neighbors.com. And the information about how to get some trees is on the front page. Kudos to Linda Barker, who helped on that a lot. She does our Facebook as well. But if you're interested in that, share it, because these trees are not expensive. They help figure out what trees you need and facilitate that. And if you have room to stick a tree in the ground, that's a good place to get one. Also, we're just starting a new initiative at the city. I got notice that they were doing a shared streets, another sort of focus group on the whole shared streets concept. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next meeting, because that will be a part of sort of an adjunct to Denver Moves. I've asked Linda Barker, who is on the Cherry Creek North zoning committee, to serve on that committee, and then she'll be able to report back not only to Cherry Creek North, but the steering committee on that, and she's agreed to do that. So I thank her for that. Susan is still on. She asked, when are we going to get together again? Two things. I know that Nick Lemaster says, oh, I just really like Zoom because it makes it really easy. And I think a lot of people do. And I don't even know if we would have access to the same space that we used to, which was in the GARP building, which is now owned, I think, by another investment group. And so I don't know what their plans are for that space, but how do you all feel about getting together? Thoughts? Susan, you speak.
Well, I really kind of miss seeing everyone. And I have to say, Christine and maybe Peggy will back me up. Taking notes on Zoom is really difficult. I'm working my tail off over here. And there are some things that I just think get lost in translation. We don't have back and forth communication as much.
I would second that. Do you remember we had a walkthrough in Cherry Creek to see all the new projects that were ongoing? It was in the fall. I think, Lou, you were there.
Yeah,
And then we all went out.
Christine organized that.
Yeah, we all went out for drinks.
Yay.
And yes, and it was like talking to new friends, and it was wonderful. I hope we can do it again.
And to
Well,
that
we have-
end, I happened to see that Christine did the Cherry Creek Chamber did a meeting that in a space at the C building that looked perfect for us.
Oh,
I don't know if she's still on or not, but that would be
Christine,
great.
are you hearing this? Could you, I know I see her here, so here she is.
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
hi,
What
Christine.
was the C building space like that you used?
It's great. I think the only issue would be time for you guys for our meetings. I don't know what time they close that building down, but they have a beautiful community space. It's top of the line audio visual and plenty of seating and desks and a great kitchen and restroom. It's great.
Well, why don't
So-
we, I'll reach out to you, Christine, to get some more information about that. And then, we did talk at one point about getting together maybe quarterly in person. I still think we're probably going to have a lot of people that want to do Zoom. Bob, do you have a thought about it?
I was just saying, I will be seeing Michelle C. Whitten in the next week, and I could certainly ask her about that space and about the timing for using it.
Oh,
That'd be
if
wonderful.
you don't mind, Bob, then could you just give me a call?
Sure. Before
And
or after?
I'm sorry?
Before or after?
Oh, after you speak with her, if you get some information, that would be great.
I will do
Yeah.
that.
Hey, Bob, the only thing, I know you know Michelle, but it's her assistants that would have to stay late.
Right.
So I might, I think it might be better to go through her assistants and find out what works for them. So I know they would let us use the space. It just means somebody's going to have to change their schedule. So they stay later. It probably won't be Michelle.
Well, the building owner probably has the right to tell them what to do.
Right. But they have a pretty small staff.
Okay, why don't we leave it at this? Christine, why don't I connect with you and then Bob, I'll loop you in. But it might be an appropriate thing to look at talking about a quarterly get together. At this point, I don't think everybody wants to agree every month to do that, but does that sound like a fair balance?
Yeah, I would throw in also the BID's office, that boardroom below. Because I
Do you think
moved
that's
into
big
their
enough?
office. And they would welcome that. And there's no free parking there either. Just like there isn't at the.
We did a few meetings there. It's not bad unless there are lots of guests. If there's
Right.
like a big group of architects or something, then it's,
Okay,
but it's also very nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's no parking at the C Foundation either. It's street parking. They have parking, but it's not, they don't really open it up to, they wouldn't open up to us in the evening.
well, Annette lives right up the block. We'll just get her parking passes. Well, I appreciate it, everybody. We're at 6:27. And so I will thank you all. I will encourage you all again to make sure I know who is representing your community, how to get in touch with everybody. I will look at and talk with Christine and maybe Lisa about the room. That might be a better option for us if we think that might work, especially if we're going to be doing any hybrid Zoom, because I think we'll make sure that other people have that option if they're not comfortable being in person. I know that Linda Barker, who heads up our Exploring Denver group in Cherry Creek North, had planned a wonderful gig at the Denver Art Museum where Paul Schaefer was going to talk about, wasn't it Paul? That was going
Yes.
to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what was he going to talk about, Linda? The rug?
Yeah, the tapestry from around the world.
And they had to cancel because he got COVID. So as much as we think, this is over, it's not. And so everybody has to feel comfortable with their own situation about whether they want to join larger crowds. So anyway, that sounded really fun and it was canceled for that reason. But okay, everybody, thank you very much. We will see you next time and I'll be sending information in the interim. Thanks
Thanks,
again.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.